Hi there. We are so excited. Today, you're going to meet Henry Sledge, and he's going to tell us about the old breed, the complete story revealed. I know many of you are familiar with the old breed that came out about 40 years ago. One of the great, not only the great World War II stories, one of the great war stories of all time. But you didn't tune in to see me, and it's my extreme pleasure to introduce Henry Sledge. Henry, welcome to the Booksmith. Thank you so much for taking time. Let's start off with the genesis. What in the world prompted you to spend so much of your life not only researching and writing, but traveling the world of the battlefields? Share the genesis of this book.
Well, Jake, and thank you it's great to be here. I'll say that to start off. I have had a passionate interest in World War II history all of my life. So I think the bedrock of everything kind of starts with that. The fact that I just had an inherent level of interest in this subject. As far as how did this book come into existence, I would say that it goes back to the fall of 2021. And my mother and I were having a conversation. I was telling her about some podcast I'd been on, some World War II podcast, and her listening to me talk and go into the things that were being asked of me on that podcast and the things that we were discussing, it was immediately apparent to her, which she knew it already, how passionate I was about my dad's legacy, how interested I was in what it meant to me and us as a family, how meaningful my dad's book with the old breed has been to generations of not just military people, but everyone who's read it. They've seen it as this incredibly visceral, emotionally naked, honest reincarnation of what it's like to be in heavy combat. Those are things that mean so much to me. My mother knew that all along, and hearing me talk about this World War II podcast I'd been on, she said, I know what this all means to you. You should probably try to get your hands on the original unedited manuscript of your dad's book. Because if you did, there's stuff in there that got cut from With the Old Breed.
Excuse me, interrupt. I happen to know that when your dad sent the manuscript, he sent 1,000 pages or thereabout, and they used a fourth of that. So
right.
There's a lot more there than was included in his book.
Exactly. And so when she said that, that ignited a spark within my own mind. And I thought, well, okay. So there was a whole process, and I'm not going to go into that. I'm not going to get down in the weeds of me contacting Auburn University, talking to the head archivist about, can we access that original unedited manuscript? Because all my dad's papers are at Auburn University. The original manuscript, though, is in closed papers. So not just anybody can get access to that. So I approached the head archivist, Greg Schmidt, the head of special collections, explained what I wanted to do. I said, I would like to research this material. If there's enough there for me to do a book, I want to do a book on it. And he immediately acquiesced. He said, if the Sledge family wants the original unedited manuscript of Eugene Sledge's work, we'll do whatever we can to support that. And they did. And so that's how it all really got started. And I go into all of that in the prologue and introduction to the book, but it's, they sent it to me electronically. I printed it out. The actual, like, if you exclude the China portion, which was its own book that my dad did get published posthumously, it was about 820 pages. So I sat down, I printed it out, 200-page coil-bound books, 4 of them. And I sat down with a highlighter and then my dad's book, and highlighter in one hand, my dad's book in the other. And I just started, I got pretty granular. I mean, like, if there was a sentence that got cut out, I highlighted it.
Man.
I went through like 5 highlighters, worked on it all for the next 3 months doing that. But it really was cool because having seen the Pacific, obviously being passionate about the Pacific miniseries, having been one of the points of contact within our family for the producers of that, And having read my dad's book just numerous times through the years, I was pretty intimately familiar with it. But I reread it very carefully, and then I've got it in my hand as I'm going through and highlighting what didn't get published.
But tell me and tell the viewers about your trips to the battlefield.
Well, I went to Peleliu in 1999. And that was
tell us about your feeling while you're standing there.
Well, I mean, the coolest that was hands down one of the coolest things I will have ever done. And the thing, so my dad fought at Peleliu, he fought at Okinawa. Okinawa is a very large populated island. I've never been there. I hope to go because some of the most incredible stuff that I was able to mine from his work for my book came from Okinawa. But Peleliu, you're talking about a sparsely populated 2-mile by 6-mile atoll on the fringes of the Western Pacific. It's one of the Palau Islands. A few hundred people live there. It's mostly jungle, coral ridges, coral mountains. I was captivated at the thought of this sparsely populated remote Pacific island and to go there and walk through the jungle and see, an American Sherman tank blown up on its side, still there. To see the
80 years.
Right. To see 55 years when I was there in 1999.
But I mean, since it was
right. I've seen pictures, it's still there. To see the rusted remains of amphibious tractors, which were landing craft. To see these things out in the jungle, to see the torn up, rusted remnants of a Japanese Zero fighter plane out in the jungle. I mean, I just have this visceral interest in all of those things. And to see them there was really an incredible feeling. Now, to go to Orange Beach 2, which if people who read this book will become intimately familiar with Orange Beach 2, that is the sector where my dad landed on D-Day at Peleliu. And to stand there and know that that's where K-35, which was my dad's unit, where they came ashore September 15th of 44, which was D-Day at Peleliu. I mean, that was an incredible feeling. To go to the airfield, which is in both the landing and the crossing of the airfield and the attack across the airfield, those events are incredibly depicted in the Pacific miniseries in parts 5 and 6, 5, 6, and 7. To go to the airfield, which at that time the jungle had begun to encroach back on it and reclaim it, but you could still see this really clearly delineated coral strip. And my guide, my buddy Eric Maylander, who I talk about in there, was with me, and I said, "Man, you put me on that airfield right where they went across the first full day of the battle." And to just walk around and imagine that, and then to read them with the old breed, how my dad described when they crossed under, incredibly heavy enemy fire, artillery fire and small arms fire, because the Japanese had them zeroed in as they're coming across. To walk across that spot was, it's one of the coolest things I will have ever done.
Well, it's the whole story with the old breed, and now this incredible book, The Old Breed. It's captivating, it's mesmerizing, and the horrors of war are in here, and we're in that book. But it's an incredible read. I was inspired. There may be hope in this world after reading this book, and I recommend it to all ages, of all folks, with all interests. It's I'll tell you, Tom Hanks says Eugene Sledge is a legend, and Eugene Sledge was a legend, and I can't encourage you enough to see what Henry Sledge has written in this incredible book. Give us a few afterthoughts before we leave.
Sure. Well, I think the heart of this, if you go beyond the unpublished material, which we've already talked about, the heart of this thing, Jake, is the relationship between a father and a son.
Yeah, I'd like to cover that if you don't mind, if you're comfortable.
Yeah, yes.
Because the mindset of folks who had relatives and attempted to talk to them who were in World War II, the mindset is they didn't want to talk about it. But that's not the case with you.
Yeah, well, my dad just happened to be a fairly loquacious guy. I mean, a lot of people were very taciturn about that, and they wouldn't talk about it. My father was not one of those people. He would quickly share, and the thing, I mean, again, all of this I delved into pretty deeply in there, but he was willing to talk about it. And again, you couple that with the fact that I already had that inherent level of interest. Think about it, as a kid growing up in the 70s, when I'm, 5 and 6 and 7 years old, and I'm watching movies like Kelly's Heroes and Patton and Battle of the Bulge, and Sans Iwo Jima, things like that. Those are the movies we watched when my brother and I were growing up. And so that was fueling our imagination. And then, I'm talking to my dad because I knew he was a Marine. He fought in the Pacific. And so I was able to have these conversations with him. And a lot of his artifacts were still like his combat pack, his dungaree jacket that he wore, his K-bar knife. I mean, he had these things in the house, and I was able to look at them. And that was like this tactile representation of something that he had experienced. And so he and I would have these conversations, and those conversations obviously continued into adulthood for me. It's one of the things that inspired me to go to Peleliu. But but we had that kind of relationship, Jake, where we could just talk to each other, and I had that inherent curiosity. And it was, I mean, a lot of veterans deal with PTSD, a lot of psychological, the psychological after effects of these traumatic things that they've experienced. I mean, World War II was a traumatic thing for my father, incredibly so. It was the hardest thing he ever went through. It was a crucible that forged, what he became as a husband and a father, which I did not experience what he experienced in 44 and 45. I did experience how that turned him, what kind of father that turned him into. And the fortunate thing about my story is that it was a pretty incredible thing. I mean, it was a very positive thing. He really compartmentalized, the angst and the trauma. Sure. He was able to compartmentalize that because he didn't want to inflict that on his family. So he could do that, but we could still, have a conversation about some humorous thing that happened between him and one of his buddies.
Which comes out in the book. That's a great part of the book. Also, I neglected to mention earlier the comradeship between these Marines who are facing death every day, every hour.
Well, that was what sustained them. The Marine Corps training, it inflicted these deprivations and hardships on them. The training, not just the combat, but the training. And on the other side of all that, my father realized they were training us that way, not just to be sadistic, because they were trying to prepare us for what was going to be the hardest thing we would ever go through. And so there was that angle to it. But then that also forged those bonds of brotherhood. When you go through adversity with people, you get closer to them.
Yeah, that comes across so well. Well, Henry Sledge, author of The Old Breed, we are very grateful for you taking time to come by and tell us about this incredible book. And we'll be the hard pressure salesman on this book. It's great. Read it, get it. And if you would like a signed first edition, go to alabamabooksmith.com.